The Longest Hour, The Saga of Apollo 13. Part 1. The Routine Flight. It was April 1970. To the American public, space travel had arguably become mundane. Just 9 months earlier, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin had walked on the moon, fulfilling President Kennedy's promise. Apollo 12 had followed suit with pinpoint accuracy. By the time Apollo 13 sat on the launch pad at Cape Kennedy, the television networks were debating whether it was even worth interrupting their regular programming to broadcast the mission. It was seen as a routine milk run to the Frau Morrow highlands of the moon. The crew was commanded by James "Jim" Lovell, the world's most traveled astronaut, a man who had already circled the moon on Apollo 8. Beside him was Fred Hayes, the lunar module pilot, a sharp and eager rookie who knew every bolt of the landing craft. The third seat, the command module pilot, was occupied by Jack Swigert. Swigert was a last-minute addition, thrown into the fray only days before launch after the original pilot, Ken Mattingly, had been exposed to German measles. On April 11th at 13:13 military time, the massive Saturn V rocket roared to life. Despite a minor hiccup where the center engine cut out 2 minutes early, the launch was successful. The spacecraft, a two-part vessel consisting of the command module Odyssey and the lunar module Aquarius, slipped the surly bonds of Earth and coasted into the black void. For the first 2 days, the mission was picture perfect. The crew joked, played music, and broadcasted a television tour of their ship. Tragically, unknown to them, the networks didn't air it. No one was watching. Part 2. The Boom. It was the evening of April 13, approximately 55 hours into the mission. The spacecraft was 200,000 miles from Earth, closer to the moon than to home. In mission control in Houston, the flight controllers were looking at telemetry data. A warning light on a hydrogen tank pressure gauge flickered. Cy Leopold, the EECOM, or Electrical, Environmental, and Consumables Manager, asked the flight director to have the crew stir the cryogenic tanks, fans inside the tanks that mixed the super-cold oxygen and hydrogen to get accurate readings. 13, we've got one more item for you when you get a chance. We'd like you to stir your cryotanks, radioed Jack Lusma from Houston. Okay, Jack Swigert replied casually. Stand by. Swigert flipped the switch labeled H2O2 fans. Seconds later, the spacecraft shuddered violently. A dull, metallic bang reverberated through the hull. The ship, usually a stable platform, began to wobble. Hey, we've got a problem here, Swigert said, his voice calm but tight. This is Houston. Say again, please. Jim Lovell keyed his mic. Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main B-bus undervolt. At first, confusion reigned. The crew thought perhaps a meteor had hit the lunar module. In Houston, controllers stared at their screens, assuming it was instrumentation error. It wasn't possible for that many systems to fail at once. But then, Lovell looked out the side window and saw the chilling reality. A white, gaseous substance was spraying out of the side of the service module, expanding into the vacuum of space like a ghostly cloud. It looks to me, looking out the hatch, that we are venting something. We are venting something out into the cosmos. It was oxygen. Tank 2 had exploded, and in doing so, it had ruptured the plumbing for Tank 1. They were bleeding their life support into space. Without oxygen, the fuel cells couldn't generate electricity. The Odyssey, their home, their command center, and the only ship capable of surviving re-entry, was dying. Part 3. The Lifeboat. Gene Kranz, the white-vested flight director in Houston, famously declared, "Let's work the problem, people. Let's not make things worse by guessing." The math was brutal. Odyssey had roughly 15 minutes of power left. If they didn't preserve the remaining battery power for re-entry, they would never return to Earth. They had to shut down the command module completely. The crew had to move into the lunar module, Aquarius. The lunar module was designed to take 2 men down to the moon's surface for a 2-day stay. It was not designed to support 3 men for a 4-day journey across the freezing void of space. It had no heat shield, it could not land on Earth, but it had oxygen and it had a working engine. It became their lifeboat. As Swigert shut down the systems in Odyssey, the once humming ship went dark and silent, cold as a tomb. They floated through the tunnel into Aquarius, which was cramped, full of sharp angles, and buzzing with alarms. Part 4. The Square Peg in the Round Hole. The immediate threat of suffocation was paused, but new problems arose like a hydra. The first was the trajectory. The explosion had knocked them off the free return path. If they did nothing, they would miss Earth by thousands of miles and drift into deep space forever. They needed to burn the lunar module's descent engine to push them back on track. But the computer systems were powered down to save energy. Lovell would have to do something almost unheard of: fly the spacecraft manually. Using the Earth's terminator, the line between day and night, in the small triangular window as a gun sight, Lovell steered the stack while Hayes and Swigert timed the burn. For 14 agonizing seconds, the engine fired. If Lovell's hand shook, if the angle was off by even a degree, they would bounce off the atmosphere or burn up. The burn was perfect. But the most insidious enemy was invisible: carbon dioxide. For every breath the 3 men took, they exhaled carbon dioxide. In a confined space, CO2 is deadly. It causes headaches, then disorientation, then sleep, and finally death. The Aquarius had lithium hydroxide canisters to scrub the air, but they were circular and designed for 2 men for 2 days. They were saturated. There were plenty of fresh canisters in the dead Odyssey, but those were square. The Aquarius slots were round. It was a classic engineering nightmare, trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, 200,000 miles from a hardware store. In Houston, a team of engineers dumped a pile of equipment on a table, everything available to the crew on the ship. Plastic bags, cardboard covers from flight manuals, bungee cords, hoses, and plenty of gray duct tape. "We have to build a filter out of this," the lead engineer said. After hours of brainstorming, they designed a contraption that looked like a piece of junk mail, but it worked. They radioed the instructions up to Apollo 13. Swigert and Hayes, following the voice from Earth, taped the bags and cardboard together. When they plugged their mailbox into the system, the airflow hissed and the CO2 levels dropped immediately. The astronauts breathed a sigh of relief, quite literally. Part 5. The Long Cold. As the spacecraft swung around the dark side of the moon, the astronauts were further from Earth than any human had ever been or has been since. They could see the lunar surface passing beneath them, the place they were supposed to land. It was a heartbreaking moment of so close yet so far. But they had no time to grieve the lost moon landing. They were fighting to survive. To conserve power for the final re-entry, they turned off everything in Aquarius except the radio and a small fan. The temperature plummeted. It dropped to near freezing, around 38 degrees Fahrenheit or 3 degrees Celsius. Condensation began to form on the walls and instruments. The ship became a damp, freezing refrigerator. The men were wearing thin flight suits. They had no blankets. They huddled together for warmth, floating in the dark. Sleep was impossible. The cold pierced their bones, and the stress was relentless. Water was also rationed. Dehydration set in. Fred Hayes developed a severe kidney infection. He was shaking with chills and fever, but he refused to complain. He knew that panic was just as deadly as the cold. Back on Earth, Ken Mattingly, the astronaut left behind because of the measles, was in the simulator. He had never gotten the measles. Now, he was the most important man on the ground. He spent hours trying to figure out the sequence to restart the frozen command module using only the limited battery power available. It was like jump-starting a car on a winter morning with a AA battery. If the sequence was wrong, the parachutes wouldn't deploy. Part 8. The Separation. 4 days after the explosion, Earth was growing larger in the window. It was time to come home. The procedure was terrifyingly complex. First, they had to jettison the service module, the cylinder that had exploded. As Lovell triggered the separation bolts and the module drifted away, the crew finally saw the damage. "There's one whole side of that spacecraft missing," Lovell exclaimed. A massive panel had been blown out, exposing the tangled guts of the engine. It was a miracle the explosion hadn't cracked the heat shield or destroyed the command module instantly. Seeing the wreckage, the 3 men realized just how lucky they were to be alive. Next came the hardest goodbye. They had to power up Odyssey and jettison Aquarius. The lunar module